It was just another cold morning at the bus stop, until he noticed a woman shivering alone. Without hesitation, he offered his jacket, expecting nothing in return. But what he didn't know was that she wasn't just any stranger. She was a powerful CEO with a life-changing secret. What happened next will leave you speechless. The wind was unforgiving that evening in Silver Pine, a city tucked between forgotten railroad tracks and snow-capped hills. It wasn't a place that made the news, nor was it one people dreamed of visiting. But it was real, raw, lived in, and in the heart of it, amid holiday decorations that twinkled like stars desperately trying to outshine the darkness, life trudged on. Along Glade Avenue, just past the closed bakery and the flickering neon sign of Murphy's Diner, sat a nearly invisible figure on a bus stop bench. The air was sharp, slicing through even the thickest coats, and yet Eli Hartman sat there quietly, as if he had made a silent agreement with the cold. You don't break me, and I won't fight you. Eli's coat, once navy blue, had faded to a grayish hue. It bore the history of too many winters, with patches stitched carefully by hand, fraying at the edges. His gloves were mismatched, his boots worn to the sole, and his backpack, his only companion, held everything he owned: a toothbrush, some sketches, a water bottle, and a photo of his son tucked deep inside an old engineering journal. Just a few years ago, Eli had been someone else: a mechanical engineer at a promising firm, a devoted husband, a proud father. His life had been structured like the blueprints he used to draw: logical, clean, with purpose in every line. But when a drunk driver ran a red light and shattered his world, leaving his wife gone and bills piling up, the structure crumbled. Grief morphed into depression. Work performance faltered. Then the job was gone. The apartment followed. And the distance between him and his teenage son widened until silence filled the space. Now, he survived by routine: soup kitchens, library hours, warming centers, and nights like this one, where the only plan was to endure. Snow began to fall, not heavy, but light and steady, dusting the sidewalks like powdered sugar. The streets grew quieter as people retreated indoors, and that's when Eli heard the quick, anxious steps of someone approaching. A woman, no more than mid-30s, rounded the corner hurriedly. Her breath puffed in white clouds as she stumbled toward the bus stop, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She wore business slacks and a light blazer, not nearly enough for the plunging temperatures. Her heels clacked sharply against the pavement, and the moment she stopped moving, her body began to tremble from the cold. Eli looked at her. Really looked. She wasn't just cold. She was shaking in a way that made her appear small, vulnerable. Her eyes were darting nervously down the road, scanning for headlights that hadn't yet appeared. Without hesitation, Eli stood up. He peeled the coat off his shoulders, every motion deliberate. The chills slammed into him immediately, but he didn't flinch. He walked the few steps toward her and held it out. "Here," he said softly. "You look colder than I feel." The woman blinked, startled. She glanced at the coat, then at him. No, I can't." "It's okay," Eli replied, with a smile that didn't ask for anything in return. "It's just a coat. You need it more than I do." She hesitated again. People didn't do this. Not anymore. Especially not in cities. Especially not strangers. And certainly not men who looked like they didn't have anything to spare. But something in his expression, calm, tired, but genuine, cut through the skepticism she'd worn like armor for years. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She slipped into the coat, surprised by how warm it still was, how it smelled faintly of peppermint and old pinewood. "I'm Arya," she offered, almost reflexively, as if the moment demanded something more than silence. "Eli," he said, nodding once. And then they stood together in the stillness, under a dim street lamp whose light flickered uncertainly in the falling snow. A minute later, the bus pulled up. Arya stepped inside, turning once to look back at the man who had given her warmth with no expectation. "Thank you again," she said, louder this time, just before the doors closed. Eli gave a small nod, stuffing his hands into his sweater sleeves as the bus pulled away and disappeared into the night. Alone once more, he sat back down on the bench. The snow didn't let up, neither did the cold. But something in his chest felt different. Not warmer, exactly, but less hollow. The city glowed beneath Arya Sloane's penthouse windows, its lights blinking like stars trapped below the sky. The skyline of silver pine shimmered under a thin veil of snow, and traffic hummed far below like a lullaby for a sleepless city. But inside her luxurious high-rise apartment, the silence was absolute. Arya lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the warmth of her heated blanket doing little to comfort her. The soft hum of the thermostat, the faint clicking of ice settling in the pipes, these were the only sounds accompanying her restless thoughts. She should have been exhausted. Her day had been packed with board meetings, a product launch debrief, investor calls, and last-minute negotiations with an overseas partner. Every hour of her life was accounted for, every second planned. As the CEO of Stratix Innovations, one of the fastest-growing tech firms on the Eastern Seaboard, Arya was known for being sharp, relentless, and efficient. But tonight, all of that felt distant, fragile even. Her mind kept returning to the man at the bus stop, Eli. He had given her his coat without a second thought. A stranger, clearly down on his luck, offering her the only layer protecting him from the bitter cold. And he had done it with a calm sincerity that left her stunned. It wasn't pity. It wasn't a transaction. It was pure, selfless kindness. She turned over in bed, pulling the blanket tighter around her, but the heat now felt artificial, like a luxury she hadn't earned. Arya's apartment was a marvel of modern design. Open concept, floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist art on the walls. Everything in it was curated, from the custom furniture to the imported espresso machine. And yet, for the first time in a long while, it felt empty. She rose from the bed and walked barefoot across the hardwood floor to the living room. The city stretched before her like a painting, alive but untouchable. On the armchair, she had draped the coat Eli had given her. She walked over and picked it up. It was heavier than she remembered, frayed in places. One of the buttons was chipped, but it was warm, not just physically. It held a warmth of something deeper, something forgotten. Her fingers brushed along the seams, and as she closed her eyes, a memory stirred. She was 8 years old again, standing at a different bus stop on the other side of town. The snow had been just as quiet, the cold just as biting. Her foster home back then was a crumbling house with drafty windows and caregivers who rotated in and out like seasonal staff. That night, she had been waiting for the city bus alone, wearing a jacket 2 sizes too small and shoes that had holes in the soles. People had passed her by. Some glanced, most didn't, until one woman stopped. A stranger, middle-aged, worn-looking but kind-eyed. She sat beside Arya and handed her a paper cup filled with hot cocoa. She didn't say much, just stayed there until the bus came. Arya had forgotten her name. Maybe she never knew it. But she remembered the warmth of that cup in her hands and the feeling that, just for a few minutes, she wasn't invisible. And now, years later, Eli had brought that memory back with a single gesture. She sank into the couch, the coat still in her arms, and stared at the fireplace screen across the room. It showed a digital flame, artificial, perfect, controlled, just like her life. She had spent so many years climbing, earning degrees, building a company from scratch, proving that she could rise above the statistics. A foster child who made it big. But in her climb, she had lost something. She had become guarded, strategic, hardened. Kindness had become a distant concept, something she associated with donations, charity galas, and employee wellness budgets. Not with people, not like Eli. He had nothing. And yet, he had given more than anyone else had in a long time. Suddenly, her corner office felt smaller. Her luxury SUV parked in the underground garage seemed irrelevant. Her success felt hollow when stacked against the simplicity of that moment at the bus stop. She didn't know why it mattered so much, why she couldn't stop thinking about him. But deep down, she felt the truth stirring inside her. He had reminded her of who she used to be, who she still could be. And she wasn't ready to let that go. The next morning, Arya Sloan sat in her office, staring blankly at her digital calendar. Meetings, reports, video calls, project briefings. It was all there, color-coded and arranged with machine-like precision. Her assistant, Dana, knocked lightly on the door, holding her tablet. "You've got 15 minutes before the investor. Cancel everything today." "Today," Arya said suddenly, still staring at the screen. Dana blinked. "Everything?" "Yes. Move it all. Reschedule, push, delegate. I don't care how. Just, I need today." Her voice was steady but quieter than usual, and there was something in her expression that Dana had never seen before. Not urgency, not stress, something softer. Okay, Dana said after a pause. I'll take care of it. By the time Arya left the building, the sky had clouded over. The city buzzed with life, as it always did. Horns blaring, people rushing, buses coughing smoke into the winter air. But Arya moved differently, with purpose, with a question burning in her chest. She returned to the corner of Glade Avenue and 7th, where the wind cut through her just days ago and where Eli had offered her more than just a coat. She looked around. The bench was empty, no sign of him. She waited for an hour. Nothing. Determined, she began asking around. The corner bakery's owner shook his head. A security guard at the nearby pharmacy hadn't seen anyone matching the description. The barista at a coffee shop down the block vaguely recalled a man with a patched coat, but it had been weeks ago. So Arya printed flyers, simple ones. Looking for Eli, they read. No photo, just a short description, and a number at the bottom. She passed them out at bus stops and pinned them to corkboards in grocery stores and laundromats. Some people nodded politely. Others dismissed her. A few offered stories that didn't lead anywhere. Then she turned to the shelters. She visited 3 in one day. Clean, well-run places staffed by people doing their best with limited resources. But no Eli. She went to a 4th the next morning, then a 5th the day after that. In the evenings, she drove through neighborhoods she hadn't visited since her foster days, parking near food pantries and warming centers. She checked sidewalks, alleys, the steps of old churches. Days turned into a week. A week stretched into 2. She began to question herself. Was this foolish? Chasing a moment? Was she just trying to ease her own guilt? Or was there something real about what had happened at that bus stop? Something bigger than either of them. And then, one snowy Thursday morning, she found him. Outside the Maple Street Community Kitchen, a place that served hot meals to anyone who needed one, Arya spotted a familiar frame. He was sitting cross-legged against the brick wall, a crumpled notepad in his lap and a stubby pencil in hand. His hands moved slowly, carefully, sketching. She approached quietly, watching as he drew lines and angles with surprising precision. Even in the cold, his focus didn't waver. Eli, she said softly. He looked up, eyes squinting slightly, trying to place the voice. Recognition dawned on his face slowly, then widened into a surprised smile. Well, I'll be. It's you, he said. Didn't think I made that strong an impression. You did, she replied, taking a step closer. I've been looking for you. He tilted his head slightly, still processing the situation. Most people forget the second the bus doors close. I couldn't, she said. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten. A part of myself I buried a long time ago, and I think maybe you can help others remember too. Eli looked down at the sketch in his lap. It was some sort of mechanical design, neat, detailed. The kind of drawing made by someone who used to build things, someone who still dreamed in blueprints. He tapped the pencil against his knee and let out a quiet breath. You're the first person in a long time who's come looking for me. That alone, it means something. Let me buy you lunch, Arya offered, and maybe we can talk about ideas, possibilities. Eli gave a small, tired smile. I could use a warm meal, and I'm curious what a CEO wants with a guy like me. Arya smiled back. So am I. Together, they walked toward the doors of the kitchen. Snow was falling again, but neither of them seemed to notice. Eli Hartman sat in the back seat of Arya Sloane's company car, staring out the tinted window as Silverpine's glass towers loomed above. It had been years since he'd been this close to the corporate world. Clean-cut professionals in tailored suits, office buildings that stretched into the clouds, lobbies that smelled of espresso and ambition. It all felt like a different lifetime. When Arya first mentioned the idea, bringing him into her company, he thought she was joking, or maybe just being kind. A well-meaning CEO trying to do her good deed for the quarter. What could a guy like me possibly offer a place like Stratix Innovations? He had asked her, sitting across from her in a modest diner the day after she found him. But Arya's response was swift and steady. Perspective, she said. Real, raw perspective. You've lived through things most of my team has only read about in books or scrolled past on their phones. You've learned resilience in a way we've forgotten. I don't need another strategist, Eli. I need someone who remembers what it means to care. She wasn't offering him a handout. She was offering him a purpose. Still, Eli hesitated. The boardroom was a far cry from the street corner. He hadn't worn a collared shirt in years, hadn't spoken in front of a group since his son's school assembly when Leo was in second grade. But Aria was persistent. She didn't just open a door, she walked through it with him. She created a new title, Culture and Humanity Advisor, and introduced him to her executive team, not as a charity case, but as someone with life-earned wisdom that couldn't be learned from an MBA. His first day, Eli showed up in slacks and a sweater Aria had bought him from a secondhand boutique. He stood in front of a dozen skeptical executives, unsure of what to say. The silence was thick. But then he told a story. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't rehearsed. It was honest. He talked about sitting on a bench in the cold and watching people pass him by for months, never making eye contact. He described how invisible he had become, how kindness had become a rarity. And then he asked the room a simple question. When was the last time you listened to someone without trying to fix them? From that moment, something shifted. Aria began placing him in workshops, team-building retreats, and department meetings. Eli didn't use slides or spreadsheets. He asked questions that disarmed people. He shared stories that made them pause. He challenged employees to look at one another not as roles or resources, but as human beings with burdens, dreams, and unseen battles. He spoke about failure, real failure, about rebuilding your dignity from rock bottom, about how being treated like you matter, even once, can reignite hope in someone who's lost everything. Some employees wept, others reflected. Many said they hadn't had a conversation that honest in years. In time, his sessions became the most requested in the company. Managers noticed a change. Office tension eased. Departments began collaborating in new ways. Employees started volunteering, mentoring, sharing openly. The quarterly reports showed something no algorithm could predict. Morale was climbing, burnout was dropping, and people were showing up not just on time, but with purpose. Productivity increased. Turnover decreased. And for the first time, people started to refer to Stratix not just as a place to work, but as a place to grow. One morning, after a company-wide town hall where Eli spoke alongside Aria, the janitor stopped him on his way out. "You said something in there that made me feel seen," the man said. "No one's ever done that here." Eli nodded, humbled. "That's what we're all trying to do, see each other again." Later that day, Aria stood in her office, watching Eli through the glass wall as he chatted with a group of interns. She saw how they leaned in, smiling, laughing, listening. She knew then she hadn't just hired someone. She had planted a seed. And something beautiful was beginning to grow. The apartment wasn't much by city standards, just 2 rooms and a kitchenette tucked inside an older brick building a few blocks from Willow Bend Park. But to Eli Hartman, it might as well have been a palace. The walls were bare at first, the furniture minimal, a small couch, a secondhand dining table, a bed that didn't creak when he turned. The heater worked and the windows let in golden light each morning. More importantly, the door locked, the water ran hot, and for the first time in years, he had a key to a place of his own. Aria had insisted on helping him find it. Not because he asked, but because she believed he deserved a new start. The lease was in his name. She'd even added a welcome mat at the door with the word HOPE stitched into it in faded blue thread. At first, Eli moved carefully through the space, as if afraid to wake from a dream. He unpacked slowly, placing his worn notepad on the nightstand, pinning a few of his sketches to the wall. He brewed coffee each morning and watched the park from the window, marveling at how something so simple, 4 walls and a roof, could feel like a miracle. But there was one piece of his life he hadn't touched in years. A name that lingered at the edges of his thoughts every day. Leo. His son. Eli hadn't spoken to Leo in almost 2 years. Not since the eviction. Not since the downward spiral that had turned his life into scattered pieces. Their last phone call had ended with Leo saying, "Dad, I just don't know how to help you anymore," followed by a long silence and the click of the line going dead. Leo had been 17 then, young, overwhelmed, and watching his father crumble. Now, Leo was in college, studying architecture, just like his mother had once dreamed. Eli kept up from a distance, quietly checking university newsletters and social media when he could, but he never reached out. Shame was a wall he hadn't known how to climb. Until now. With a gentle push from Aria, Eli picked up the phone one evening. His hand trembled slightly as he scrolled through old contacts until he found the number he had never deleted. The phone rang. Once, twice. Then, hello? The voice was deeper than Eli remembered. Older, but unmistakably Leo's. Eli's mouth went dry for a moment. Then he found his voice. Hey kid, it's Dad. There was silence, heavy, full of unspoken words. Then Leo said softly, I didn't think I'd hear from you again. I wasn't sure you'd want to, Eli replied honestly. Stop it, I've been working. Got a place, a job. It's not perfect, but I'm trying, Leo. I'm really trying. Another pause. And then where are you? Willowbend. Just got settled in a place near the park. I'm coming home this weekend, Leo said. Can we talk? In person? Eli's breath caught. Yeah, I'd like that. More than anything. That Saturday, Leo showed up wearing a campus hoodie and carrying a nervous energy. He stood in the doorway for a moment, scanning the apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was his father's. Clean. Lived in. Real. They hugged, stiff at first, but it lingered. Years of distance compressed into a few quiet seconds. They spent the day catching up over coffee and grilled cheese sandwiches. Leo told him about classes, late-night study sessions, the pressure to perform. Eli listened, asked questions, laughed at his son's stories, and admitted his own mistakes without excuses. Over the next few weeks, their bond slowly mended. Leo began stopping by more often, sometimes bringing books, sometimes just staying for dinner. They cooked together, talked late into the night, walked through the park like they used to when Leo was little. Eli even showed him his notepad, sketches, ideas, designs that had lived in his mind during the coldest nights on the street. Leo flipped through them with wide eyes. These are incredible, he said. You should be teaching this stuff. Eli smiled, heart full. I think I'm still learning. Together, they began a new rhythm, not trying to recapture the past, but building something new, brick by brick, a relationship rooted not in what they had lost, but in what they still had left. And in that modest apartment, with laughter in the air and the scent of tomato soup simmering on the stove, Eli finally began to believe something he hadn't dared to before. That it wasn't too late. Not for love, not for family, not for redemption. The shift was subtle at first. Arya and Eli had fallen into a rhythm, not one dictated by contracts and calendars, but by conversations that flowed naturally, without pressure or pretense. Working side by side at Stratix Innovations, their relationship deepened in the quiet spaces between their professional lives. It wasn't a matter of schedules or strategy. It was a slow unfolding of trust. Every day, Arya found herself more drawn to Eli's presence. He brought something to the office no corporate consultant ever could. Stillness, the kind that grounded others. While executives hustled from meeting to meeting, Eli listened. When voices rose in boardroom tension, he diffused the moment with a thoughtful question or a simple story. His way wasn't loud, but it was powerful. He noticed things others missed, when someone was having a bad day, when a new hire felt overwhelmed, when Arya herself was carrying too much. They began taking walks in Willowbend Park during lunch breaks. At first, the conversation stayed light, weather, city life, childhood memories. But soon, they shared more. Eli spoke of his late wife, Elise, with tenderness, about how her laugh could lift the room and how losing her had felt like the ground vanishing beneath him. He didn't dwell in sorrow, but he didn't hide it either. Arya, in turn, opened up about her childhood in foster care, about the times she felt like a misplaced piece in someone else's life, about the need to prove herself over and over until her identity was more armor than skin. Eli listened without judgment, offering no advice, just presence. In the evenings, they sometimes sat in Arya's office after hours, sipping tea as the city lights blinked outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. They'd talk about everything and nothing. Books they loved, the future of technology, what kindness really meant in a world that often forgot to be kind. Arya, who had once built walls of steel around her heart, found herself letting them down without realizing it. And Eli, who had thought love was a chapter closed for good, began to feel something stir again, something gentle and entirely unexpected. The turning point came after a company gala. The night had been filled with elegant speeches, polished handshakes, and celebratory toasts. Arya had delivered a keynote on innovation through compassion, her words inspired by the very values Eli had helped infuse into the company culture. Eli stood at the back of the room during her speech, hands clasped, watching her with quiet admiration. She spoke with fire and grace, commanding the room not with dominance, but with conviction. And when she locked eyes with him in the final moments of her address, something unspoken passed between them. A recognition of everything they had been through and everything they had become. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the ballroom was nearly empty, Arya stepped out onto the rooftop terrace. The stars shimmered overhead, and the chill in the air made her wrap her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Eli joined her, hands in his coat pockets. They stood in silence for a while, side by side, looking out over the city. "You've changed my life," Arya said softly, her voice barely louder than the wind. Eli turned to her, his gaze steady. "You gave me mine back." There were no grand declarations, no sweeping romantic lines, just the honesty of two people who had seen each other at their most vulnerable and still stayed. Arya took a small step closer, and Eli, as if guided not by impulse, but by understanding, reached out gently to touch her hand. Their kiss came not from passion, but from peace. It wasn't cinematic, it wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, honest, and full of warmth. It said, "I see you, I trust you. Let's begin again, together." And in that moment, under the stars and above the city that had brought them both to their knees at different points in life, they found something rare, a love born not out of rescue, but of recognition. A year passed, not quickly, but gracefully. A year of change, of quiet healing, of growth rooted in kindness. And then, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Eli and Arya stood hand in hand at the Lindenwood Community Center, surrounded by faces who had witnessed their remarkable journey. It wasn't a traditional wedding, by any means. There were no luxury venues, no towering cakes, no glittering chandeliers. But there was love, undeniable, palpable, and honest. The community center held special meaning. It was the first place Eli had found warmth after losing everything. A place where volunteers served soup without judgment, where a cot in the corner had felt like salvation. Now, it was where he would start a new chapter, with the woman who had walked into his life on a snowy night and seen him for more than his circumstances. Instead of tuxedos and gowns, guests arrived in cozy sweaters, scarves, and boots. There was a sign at the entrance that read, "Please no gifts. Bring warmth instead." And they did. Dozens of guests came carrying bags of coats, blankets, gloves, and winter boots, all of which were placed in a large bin labeled the warmth table. Eli's son, Leo, stood proudly beside him as best man, a quiet strength in his eyes. Their relationship, once strained by silence and separation, had blossomed into something rich and real. Eli had not just rebuilt a connection with his son, he had earned back his place as a father, one moment at a time. Arya's foster mother, now elderly and frail, sat in the front row. She clutched a handkerchief in one hand and a small bouquet in the other. Tears traced down her cheeks as she watched Arya, once a child lost in the cracks of the system, now radiant in a simple ivory dress, speaking vows not just of love, but of compassion, partnership, and shared purpose. When they exchanged rings, the room was silent. Not from formality, but from reverence. Everyone there understood that this was more than a wedding. It was a celebration of survival, of second chances, of love that had risen from the ashes of brokenness. After the ceremony, the reception was held in the main hall, decorated with soft fairy lights and tables lined with handwritten notes of gratitude from people who had once received help from the center. Instead of a DJ, a local jazz trio played in the corner. Instead of toasts filled with grandeur, there were stories, shared by those whose lives had been touched by Eli and Arya's kindness. It wasn't extravagant, but it was perfect. Months after the wedding, Arya and Eli launched a project they had dreamed up on one of their long walks through Willow Bend Park, the Warmth Initiative. It was more than just a charity. It was a movement, designed to provide coats, shelter, mentorship, and dignity to those in need. It operated on a simple belief that no act of kindness was ever too small to matter. Through local partnerships, the program expanded rapidly, first throughout Silver Pine, then into neighboring cities. Volunteers distributed warm clothing in winter, but also offered counseling, job training, and housing assistance. Arya used her business influence to bring corporate sponsors into the fold. Eli used his story, his presence, to build trust where there had once been fear and silence. They didn't do it for recognition. They did it because they knew what it meant to be forgotten, and what it felt like to be remembered. In time, their story became a quiet legend in Silverpine. People told it to their children. Teachers referenced it in classrooms. Young professionals repeated it in cafes, inspired to look beyond their screens and their routines. And sometimes, strangers would approach Eli in the park or after a speaking event. They'd ask him, "What was the moment that changed everything for you?" He'd smile, not with pride, but with the gentle humility of someone who had lived through the dark and come out the other side. And he'd say, "Just one cold night and one person willing to take a coat from a stranger." If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or reminded you of the power of kindness, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more stories that uplift, heal, and inspire. Subscribe now, and remember, even the smallest act of kindness can change someone's world.